Picture this. It's the mid-1800s. Two young nations, neighbors, are on a collision course. 1. The United States is buzzing with an idea called manifest destiny. It's this powerful belief that the nation is destined, even divinely ordained, to stretch from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Pacific. To achieve this, America casts its ambitious gaze southward toward the vast, sprawling territories of its neighbor, Mexico, between 1846 and 1848. These clashing ambitions will ignite a conflict that reshapes the continent forever. The Mexican-American War. How did it all begin? Well, it's a story of land, politics, and a river. The first major domino was the Texas Revolution in 1836. American settlers in the Mexican state of Texas declared independence, creating the Republic of Texas. For nearly a decade, Texas stood as its own nation, but its heart longed to join the United States. Mexico, however, never officially recognized Texas's independence. To them, Texas was a rebellious province, and they warned the U.S. that annexing it would be an act of war. In 1845, U.S. President James K. Polk, a firm believer in manifest destiny, made the decisive move. He officially annexed Texas, making it the 28th state. This was the spark, but the kindling was already dry. The two nations couldn't even agree on the border. The U.S. claimed the Rio Grande was the boundary, while Mexico insisted it was the Nueces River further north. That's a huge chunk of disputed territory, and both sides were willing to fight for it. Polk sent a diplomat, John Slidell, to Mexico City not only to settle the border dispute, but also to try and buy California and New Mexico. The Mexican government, feeling insulted and pressured, refused to even meet with him. The stage was set. With diplomacy dead, Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor and his troops into the disputed zone between the two rivers. From Mexico's perspective, this was a foreign invasion of their sovereign land. In April 1846, Mexican cavalry attacked a U.S. patrol on the north side of the Rio Grande. This was the moment Polk had been waiting for. He went before Congress and declared, "Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil." On May 13, 1846, Congress declared war. Not everyone was on board, though figures like a young Abraham Lincoln and the writer Henry David Thoreau questioned the war's morality, seeing it as a land grab to expand slavery. The war unfolded on three main fronts. In the north, General Zachary Taylor pushed deep into Mexico, winning key battles like Monterrey and Buena Vista. His victories made him a national hero, so much so that he'd later become president. At the same time, a second American force under General Stephen Kearny marched west. They swiftly captured Santa Fe in New Mexico without a single shot fired, and then continued on to California. There, they joined forces with American settlers who had already started their own uprising, the Bear Flag Revolt, securing California for the United States. But the decisive campaign was yet to come. President Polk, perhaps a bit wary of Taylor's growing popularity, planned a daring new strategy, a direct strike at the heart of Mexico. He appointed General Winfield Scott to lead an amphibious invasion, the largest in U.S. history at that time. In March 1847, Scott's army landed at Veracruz on the Gulf Coast. After a tough siege, they captured the city and began the grueling 260-mile march inland toward Mexico City, following a similar route to the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés centuries earlier. This march was brutal. The American army faced not just the Mexican military but also guerrilla fighters and deadly diseases like yellow fever. Yet Scott was a brilliant strategist. He outmaneuvered the Mexican forces at every turn, winning critical battles at Cerro Gordo and Churubusco. The final obstacle was Mexico City itself, defended by brave soldiers and even military cadets from the Chapultepec Military Academy. The Battle of Chapultepec Castle was fierce and heroic, but ultimately the American forces were too strong. On September 14, 1847, the U.S. flag was raised over Mexico City's Central Plaza. The fighting was essentially over. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in February 1848. The terms were devastating for Mexico. The nation was forced to cede over half of its territory to the United States. This enormous transfer of land, known as the Mexican Cession, included the present-day states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. In return, the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million and agreed to assume $3.25 million in debt owed by the Mexican government to U.S. citizens. The Rio Grande was officially established as the Texas border. The consequences were immense and long-lasting. For the United States, manifest destiny was realized. The country now stretched from sea to shining sea. The discovery of gold in California just days before the treaty was signed would trigger the gold rush of 1849, fueling westward expansion and immense wealth. The war also served as a training ground for a generation of officers who would later become famous generals on both sides of the American Civil War. Men like Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, and Stonewall Jackson. However, this new territory came with a thorny problem. Would these new lands be free or slave states? This question would intensify the already simmering sectional tensions and push the nation ever closer to the brink of civil war just a little over a decade later. For Mexico, the war was a national trauma. The loss of so much land and the military defeat led to a long period of political instability and resentment toward the United States that would linger for generations. The war left deep scars on the nation's psyche and fundamentally altered its path. The Mexican-American War is often overshadowed in U.S. history, but its impact was monumental. It redrew the map of North America, fulfilled a national ideology, and sowed the seeds of a future. Even bloodier conflict within the United States itself It was a transformative, brutal, and defining chapter in the history of two nations forever bound by a shared border. Thank you so much for watching. Hey everyone, this is a complex piece of history. Today we're diving deep into a conflict that reshaped North America. If you found this video interesting that's and want to learn more about by other major American conflicts, but whose consequences are still felt every single day. We're talking about the Mexican-American War. To truly understand it, we need to turn back the clock, not to the first gunshot, but to the events that made the war almost inevitable. Our story begins in 1836. Picture this, the vast sun-drenched territory of Texas. At the time, it wasn't the Lone Star State we know today. It was a province of Mexico. For years, American settlers invited by the Mexican government had been pouring into the region. They brought with them their own language, their own culture, and crucially, their own ideas about governance. Tensions simmered over issues like slavery, which was abolished in Mexico, and the desire for more local control. Finally, in 1836, these tensions boiled over. The settlers in Texas declared their independence, fighting a short, brutal war that culminated in the birth of the Republic of Texas. Now, imagine you're Mexico. A massive chunk of your northern territory has just broken away, led by foreign settlers. Would you just accept it? Of course not. Mexico refused to recognize Texas's independence. From their perspective, Texas was a rebel province, plain and simple. Any attempt by another nation to interfere was seen as a direct threat to their sovereignty. They made it crystal clear. If the United States tried to annex Texas, they would consider it an act of war. For nearly a decade, Texas existed as an independent nation, the Lone Star Republic. It was a precarious existence. The new republic was financially unstable and constantly worried about a Mexican attempt to reclaim the territory. So, naturally, many Texans looked eastward to the United States. They had strong cultural and economic ties, and the idea of joining the Union was incredibly appealing. And spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. To them, annexing Texas wasn't just an opportunity, it was a duty. On the other side, opponents, mostly from the north, were horrified. They saw the annexation of Texas as nothing more than a land grab designed to expand the institution of slavery. They argued it was morally wrong and would inevitably lead to a war with Mexico, a war they believed would be unjust and fought for the sole purpose of adding more slave territory. With Polk's election, the writing was on the wall. In one of his final acts as president, John Tyler, not wanting to be left out of the history books, pushed a resolution through Congress to annex Texas. In 1845, Texas officially became the 28th state of the United States. For Mexico, this was the ultimate betrayal. It was a slap in the face, a confirmation of their worst fears. They had warned the US for years, and now their warning had been ignored. They immediately severed diplomatic relations with Washington. Polk first tried to buy it. He sent a diplomat, John Slidell, to Mexico City with an offer. Polk was willing to pay up to $25 million for California and the vast territories in between, but the Mexican government, feeling insulted and outraged by the annexation of Texas, refused to even meet with Slidell. The political climate in Mexico was so volatile that any leader who even considered selling territory to the Americans would have been branded a traitor and overthrown. The diplomatic route was a dead end. Knowing full well that Mexico considered this area its own sovereign territory, Polk made a provocative move. He ordered General Zachary Taylor and his troops to march south from the Nueces River and set up a fort on the northern bank of the Rio Grande, directly opposite the Mexican city of Matamoros. This was the equivalent of a foreign army setting up camp on the edge of your town and pointing their cannons at you. It was a deliberate provocation designed to elicit a military response. For weeks, the two armies stared each other down across the river. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The Mexican commander repeatedly demanded that General Taylor withdraw his forces to the Nueces River. Taylor, following Polk's orders, refused. It was a standoff. Finally, on April 25, 1846, the inevitable happened. A Mexican cavalry unit crossed the Rio Grande and ambushed an American patrol in the disputed territory. Several American soldiers were killed. This was the moment Polk had been waiting for. When news of the skirmish reached Washington, Polk went before Congress. He didn't mention that he had sent American troops into disputed territory. He didn't mention the long history of the Texas issue. He framed it simply and powerfully. Mexico, he declared, has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil. It was a brilliant piece of political framing. The narrative was clear. Innocent Americans had been attacked on their own land. Despite some passionate opposition from figures like a young Abraham Lincoln, who questioned whether the spot where blood was shed was truly American soil, Congress was swept up in a wave of patriotic fervor. They overwhelmingly voted to declare war on Mexico. The seeds of conflict, planted years earlier with the independence of Texas and nurtured by the ambitions of Manifest Destiny, had finally blossomed into all-out war. The Mexican-American War had begun.